I'm going to start at kind of that low-hanging fruit level. What's kind of a big takeaway from this group, especially relative to a group of serious seed stock producers and their association compatriots? What are some of the takeaways you all personally would find from those first three talks?
Chip, can I begin? I'm going to lead Dale to something I want him to talk about. I'll throw friend the floor. So I'm going to indicate my opinion. I think he'll agree that we have placed too much emphasis historically on ribeye area, and we now have cattle in our production systems across all breeds that have appropriate and/or large ribeye areas and inadequate muscling in the remainder of the animal. And long term, to improve the system, the meat muscle system, we need to get away from that one singular measurement. And in choosing the future sires and dams and criteria, we need to place more emphasis on overall muscling and the hindquarter, thickness through the round, thickness through the cushion, thickness through the literally the inside and outside round of the animal is probably a better place to get the overall cutability of the animal.
I agree.
Chip.
That was easy. You agree?
So if you agree,
We're done here, folks.
So if you all will solve this challenge of compositional vagary in the near term, I'm totally with you. I think you're spot on. Here's my challenge as we're just talking as making mating decisions. In lieu of things getting better, I could almost argue that for the first time in my career, ribeye has become important. And the reason being, if their customers are out making 1,600-pound calves, the current dynamics force them to even put more emphasis on ribeye area because the equation gets so wonky, as you alluded to earlier. And so, unfortunately, in this near term of lack of clarity, but how would you respond when I say it's plausible that somebody could argue, I need to push a little harder on that just to keep my yield grades from getting just off the charts so wrecked?
I think we would both agree that's true in the near term, while the current system is still in place. And we understand that, and our committee is very cognizant of that very issue. We've discussed this multiple times, that whatever the new system becomes, all of your group, all seed stock, all commercial cattlemen, all cattle feeders, everybody upstream needs to know what the new criteria are. That's part of the discussion, and when we know and understand that. And we have to be very open and forthcoming with whatever the new system is so that selection can be made in that direction.
Yeah, I'll add on. I mean, you're 3 years away. Your breeding decision today is 3 years away from being graded. Which is kind of ironic, because I told you it was going to be 3 to 5 years, in my opinion, before this system changed. So literally you're making a decision today that may match up to a different yield metric. Hope. And along with what Ty's saying, I think there's no doubt that it will be more holistic, the measurement of yield. And so if it's not, then we have failed, right, in guiding that committee in that direction. So you can maintain emphasis on ribeye area. I would never go on the record of saying, decrease your emphasis on ribeye area. But simultaneous to that, to Ty's point, you're going to have to increase emphasis on total conformation and phenotype. And undoubtedly, that's good for our industry. We need red meat yield holistically to improve. And the primary reason we need that, perhaps, is to increase feed efficiency. Because if you talk to a growth biologist and a muscle biologist, they'll tell you the best way to improve weight gain, feed efficiency, is by improving muscularity. Because muscle takes 4.5 calories per gram to produce, and fat takes 9. So we know that it's far more efficient to put that type of weight onto an animal than it is to put on fat. So whether it's beef on dairy or just improving, Simmental genetics for the conventional beef industry, you have to begin to focus on whole animal conformation and muscularity now. And the best way to do that is to start, measuring that phenotype somehow, some way, whether it's just a visual assessment or going out and finding a tool, some of which are commercially available to measure phenotype.
If my takeaway from that is a small town kid that raised cows forever and a day, don't sacrifice muscularity for growth. All right, I think sometimes we think those things are in the same basket just because the animal's getting bigger, but muscularity can suffer when we lean into growth really hard. So I think that's a takeaway in this conversation, maybe more generically.
I understand too that a new yield system will put pressure on fat in a negative way. And so what that means is you're going to be expected to produce animals with less fat externally and more marb, right? So that's kind of an anomaly in what we're doing. If your dream comes true, Bryon, or whoever you were talking to earlier, and you go from 360 to 760 corn, obviously we're going to have to do that at a lighter endpoint with less external fat, but maintain marbling. Marbling is paramount to everything we do in our industry. I think everybody recognized that, talked about that. We have to maintain genetics for marbling, but we have to do that quicker. The animals are going to have to get there quicker with fewer days on feed and less external fat. It's a big ask.
But I would think as breeders, and as you're talking to your commercial clients, and for each of you who also that have some of these own personal interests, in some ways this is something that's very appealing, because your consumers on wholesale day, they want a bull who looks like a man, right? It's much easier to sell that masculine bull who looks the part. I can see Mr. Wolf just going, amen. Okay? And so I think in some ways this just lines up with what we want to do. But for a long time, maybe we've had this conflicting narrative going on that confused us personally. And maybe what I'm hearing is it's not as complicated as it need to be. Don't necessarily shy away from using responsible metrics that you have right now, but also don't totally throw away your eyeballs when you're studying shape on both ends of that animal that we've known since 4-H judging camp back when we were 12, that there was some merit in. So,
especially when the heritability is high enough to move the needle sooner than later.
there you go. Okay, so I'm going to keep cranking, but note. Oh, good.
I have a few questions. First of all, I'll start out by saying I'm older than you guys. And so since the time I was a kid, I've heard that we're going to modify the yield rate equation. And I know many of you in here have heard that as well. How confident are you that that in fact is going to happen, and it's going to happen in the relatively near future? I know you're talking 5 years, 5 years. Are you absolutely confident?
99%.
Hey, that's pretty confident.
Well, and here's why. Because the industry may not wait on USDA to do it. And I think that's the biggest kicker, okay? So the industry is at a point, packers in particular, where they may very well not wait on USDA to be the third party to verify yield. And then they may move on to say that they're not going to verify quality either, although I think that's a lot further down the line. I think we all understand that bureaucratic red tape and particularly governmental, policy takes a long time, and there's a lot of resistance there to change that, but it may change before they do that. Now, I'm saying may, right? I'm not advocating that USDA shouldn't be the overseeing third party, but the conversation is at least that if they hold this up too long, and if they, don't conform to what we really need to do and make a change post 1960, 64 years later, right, then we're not going to wait.
In the room, I'm going to say are all of the right people who are pushing in one direction to make change. I don't know in previous years if everybody was on board. There are very few naysayers in the industry today that say, nope, let's do what we've been doing for 65 years. We're moving together as an industry.
The reality is we've moved into an era now, all things coming together, where we can actually measure red meat yield. So it no longer becomes a single metric, it becomes a holistic measurement. And so I think that's what's moved us forward, is the ability to not take a single measurement as a predictor, but to truly use technology, whether that be X-ray or 3D imaging or whatever it might be, to measure red meat yield.
Can I dovetail on something? Wait for just a second, then I'll go back to you. Prior to everybody sitting back down, one of the questions we were having, and I think it's where Dr. Schaefer's going, is as this system starts to become less difficult to envision, as it starts to formulate itself, what's the approach of the committee to making sure that we have enough years of early notice of the phenotypes that we're going to need to predict what these folks need? How sensitive is the committee to providing that information so that we can start to build the right kind of cattle before the system's implemented?
Very sensitive. It's known. There are seed stock producers on the committee who are part of the force pushing in that direction. So I don't have a timeline. I don't think Dale does either, but we know that information has to be provided in a timely manner.
You should be gathering information now, on total phenotype. Now, you said it perfectly. I mean, what we're really measuring here is what you were taught to do judging livestock as a young kid, which is to look for total conformation, total muscularity, in addition to, ribeye area measurement or ribeye area EPD. So you need to be looking at those metrics now and making those decisions now. And the good news is it pays dividend, because you're going to produce heavier cattle with improved composition, and your feed efficiency is going to go up in the process. Now, that's what the data say.
So you're going to where I was going. So we have to, in the world of genetic evaluation, we have to play genetic evaluation chess, so to speak. What's going to happen in the future? Right now, from a practical standpoint, we have growth well quantified. We have ribeye area, we have back fat, we have carcass weight. Those are the things we have. And right now, we could institute, if we had a sense of what the outcome or what your ultimate predictor is of red meat yield, we could leverage, at least right now, we could leverage those metrics. Did you say there was you saw you had an R squared when you put everything together of like 98% red meat yield? And that takes how many variables are you looking at?
That equation's based on 9 components.
Yeah. So we're probably not going to be able to get, there's a practical, where there's always a balance. Practicality, how many traits are we able to actually gather up from breeders? So we do have, like I said, we've got growth, birth, weaning, yearling. If we could have you come back with some coefficients to weight those traits, we could get going right now in putting together an evaluation to help us move in the direction that things are going to go.
So I didn't show you one of the technologies that's available, because I'm not trying to sell it, but there's a technology out there that uses radar to measure the conformation of live cattle. And it's being utilized heavily by early adopters to get at a phenotype EPD or GETD. So there are ways to measure phenotype outside of an expert evaluator coming out and subjectively, measuring either progeny or bulls. So you need to get into a system where you're measuring phenotype. The problem is we've given you ribeye area, not we, but instrument grading, primarily in ties data collection service nationally, has given you a lot of ribeye area back, right? And that's why you've been able to make all of that progress in ribeye area and marbling score, because you have something firm to select upon. What you're saying is, or at least what I'm hearing, is you don't have a metric right now to go select on. I agree with that. It's nearly impossible for us through 9 components developed through a multivariate technique to tell you exactly what to select on, except for the primary drivers of red meat yield are the things Ty mentioned: round dimensionality, hindquarter muscling. Those are the primary drivers outside of fat thickness, which is a feedlot management discussion, right? But those are the factors. You need to start selecting for hindquarter muscling early. That I think that's what summarizes that the best for my.
The unfortunate part is that's a phenotype we don't have currently, but it sounds like that's a phenotype we need to start pursuing. And it sounds like we need to talk with you guys more behind the scenes about coming up with something that we could implement essentially immediately, and then evolve to where we're collecting phenotypes that fill in the gaps so we account for more and more variation in the end goal.
If I could pull the slide back up for you, I would show you that some of the metrics that are going into those equations are like forearm circumference and hind shank circumference. So there are measures, anatomical measures, that are strongly related to total red meat yield, but we're not confident enough in those right now because we don't have hundreds or thousands of data points to back up those single measurements.
Bruce Holmquist from Canadian Simmental Association.
Good morning. Certainly appreciated all your presentations over the last 2 days. I learned a lot today. I didn't know there's 450 pounds of tallow out of an animal. That's huge. So I'm really heartened to hear that we're going to do some changes and focus on muscling, but from a breed association perspective, I can just imagine the pressure that we're going to put on calving these birth weight and things like that. That muscle starts to develop early. And I'm from Canada. We have more muscle in our cattle. We have fleck-bay cattle that have more jam and performance and muscle and things like that. So it's well suited to this discussion. The point, though, that I'm worried about, and going back to the one slide of the Euro grading system or muscle shape system, it's not really a grading system in my mind, but I've spent a lot of time there, and I hope we don't go too far that way, because that is antagonistic to fertility, okay? I've seen a lot of the more double-muscled type breeds, Charolais, Limousin, they're tubular cattle. So let's be cautious in how big a step we take towards that. And I think Simmental's really well positioned to fit into this new model, but let's not go to extremes. So sorry I didn't have a question, but just some comments from my experience in Europe.
I would just comment to that say that's part of the reason, those two comments to me, hopefully if you're a breeder in the room, or maybe somebody brought a commercial client along, realize that's why we're having these conversations now, right? So that we can be thinking about the things that Wade's was pulling on. How do we provide you the meaningful data in advance? Or to Bruce's point, how do we provide multi-trait selection, indexes? How do we do these things responsibly long-term so we balance those? And so that's why I think it is so germane that we have this, conversation now.
Well, one thing I want to add a comment for clarity here, we are not trying to paint this into a picture of the pork industry, and Bryon made that point very clear. We should not holistically pursue red meat yield and muscularity in cattle. I want to make that very clear. We understand that because when we first started talking about red meat yield, the first people to call us were the likes of certified Angus beef and the Angus industry. It says, hey, we've been pursuing marbling, maybe too much, for a long time. We can't go down this road of just red meat yield, and we agree. right? We know that. Beef hangs its hat on marbling and eating quality, and that should remain number one in beef demand, and it does. So just know that this does have to be the 1%ers, the 2%ers, 3%er. And I'll give credit to Chip. I mean, he's the first guy with me personally to get on a phone call 3 years ago or more to say, we need to start looking at muscling and measuring muscling outside of ribeye area and holistically. So the right guy sitting up here in the front to understand how we balance and measure those things moving forward. So I just want to make it clear, marbling is still king, and it should remain important.
And all three iterated that very clearly.
You made the comment, and I'm glad you clarified that we don't want to chase the pork and the chicken because of where they've gone, and they've produced more, but it's a less than ideal product. So that is what you said, correct? Okay, so my next question is, or the follow-up to that is, we all know as we change from fat to muscle, we're going to gain weight. We're at the I think we're at the highest point in my lifetime in terms of acceptability of carcass weight. We're routinely seeing up to 1,600 pounds with no real fear of that whatsoever. Industry acceptability, 1,500 to 1,600 pounds, more so than we've ever seen. So as we change the dimensions on these carcasses, where do we say this is too much? I'm old enough that I lived through they're too big for the box.
I'm going to throw that to Ty, only because those who were with us yesterday, and Greg couldn't be with us yesterday, so he didn't get to hear some of your conversation, Ty, about where we're heading in terms of size. So run with that.
In my opinion, no one in this room will be alive when we hit a plateau. It is long, long past all of us. I've done research where we're easily feeding cattle to 2,600 pounds. I've witnessed 4,500, 4,800 pound steer. The mature weight of a steer is multiple fold what you think it is. Many, many, many thousand pounds. Arguably up to 5,000 pounds. And that has to do with a lot of growth physiology reasons, most of which had to do with us removing the testicles. But no one in this room gets paid for a lighter weight, slower growing, smaller animal. So everyone's incentive, from the original seed stock producer to the packer, is to increase weight a little bit year over year. That's how we dilute all of our expenses. We're going to continue to add weight for the foreseeable future. And I'm not kidding when I say someday a 1,500 pound carcass will be normal. We're not that far away. I know of places producing 1,200 and 1,300 pound carcasses today regularly. The beef processor has the same math. They can only kill 390 animals per hour. That is the legal speed limit that the government allows. So they have to come in a little bit heavier day after day, year over year, to dilute an increasing cost structure that's coming at them just from inflation, if nothing else. So you've witnessed an increasing bump in heavyweight discount, or the starting point for heavyweight discount. When I was a student, a 900 pound carcass was a bomber, quote unquote. And I know Chip knows what I'm referring to. 730, 740, 750 was a normal weight carcass. There's one grid today and one packer who discounts anything less than 750. So 749 is a lightweight on their grid. Their heavyweight doesn't start until 1150. I know another packer that has no heavyweight discount. And I know several cattle feeders who've negotiated no heavyweight discount.
So Ty, I'm going to pull on that, and then I'm going to throw something to Dr. Wiegand directly on this front. So Greg, I totally get the question, And I guarantee you, everybody, there's a bunch of people in this room have that same sort of angst in their gut, right? Because we don't want to go where we used to be. I think the beauty is Simmental breeders are so well situated for this phenomenon. You've positioned yourself different than almost every other breed population. Why? Because your breed isn't a religion. And as a result, you've accepted hybridization. That's the magic bullet for us, right? Because we can use breed complementarity to allow us to take a similar mating and keep cow size depressed so your clients don't go broke on cow, and yet still put those cattle on feed and allow them to go to those weights that might sound just bizarre to you and still say high cutability. And I see you, Kurt. I'll come back to you, guy. I'm already first. But I'm going to throw a question to Dr. Wiegand on this front, because one of the things I didn't say is for many, many years, he ran a lot of commercial Sim-Angus cattle himself first. And he was balancing this same thing. I even know some of the sires he would use to intentionally keep cow size depressed, but he's going to maximize value on the other side. Dr. Wiegand, any comments in terms of just practically day-to-day what you've seen trying to stretch the things that we're talking about on both ends?
So the reality for our business model was in the middle of fescue country, trying to understand cow costs. And we were not super low input by any means, but we wanted to optimize the space. Put a lot of pressure on curve benders. I had a faculty member that's a close colleague that helped me get cows bred because he was a reproductive physiologist and I'm a butcher. So I leaned into him a little bit. And a couple of things that over the years, we did this for 14 years of pressure on it. But the reality was, he would tell you that my cows would come to the chute probably a little under-conditioned, and he was surprised at how good the pregnancy rate was on the other side. But we were really forcing them into that model. And, you know, at the end of the day, my master's is in genetics. So finding the curve bender that fits the model, I think, is really important. And I was perfectly happy to have a smaller statured cow that would wean the bigger calf. But it wasn't just weaning weight for me, right? It was, my eye was on, I wasn't just turning that calf in. And in Missouri, we do a lot of that, right? I mean, we have a really strong feeder calf basis, but I had some pressure that I thought about who gets this one next, and how will that calf grow, and what will that carcass conformation look like? We put quite a bit of pressure on that. And at the end of the day, when the administrative job got in the way of the habit at home, I turned over a cow herd to a former student that I was really proud to say worked well on lower input, high fescue pressure, was calving. You know, I was a flashlight cowboy. All right, I had to make sure they were going to calve. So I really take to heart the comment about we don't need to be way out on one end or the other of this thing. And it is the reason that I leaned into this hybridization model and strongly believe in the crazy concept of crossbreeding, which we get beat on periodically. So yeah, we made that work, I think, quite well.
Proof of concept. Mr. Ropp has been remarkably patient.
I'm really trying. I don't have enough time to answer all the questions that I've got, but I want to start with something. First of all, I think the point about I think we're positioned as a continental component to add physical muscle in addition to providing as much marbling as any continental breed and then some. So I think we're in a good position from that standpoint. Coming out of the pig business, so I understand a little bit more about red fibers and white fibers and bathed in lipid versus glycogen consuming, all those kind of things. And so the chase for extra muscle, I think, will be a challenge and still maintain the marbling levels that we'd like. And yet I think we're in a nice balanced position now, as long as we can continue to increase the slope of our marbling accretion. I don't think physical muscle is an issue for Sim-Angus cattle whatsoever. I don't think that's a challenge. And Bruce brought that up. I don't think it's a challenge. I think we're in good shape that way. My question, though, is we're beginning to more and more conversations with systems, more and more conversations with supply chains. I love talking to supply chains because they have targets. They don't just say, this is where we're going. This is where the industry's going. We just have to go with it. They say, no. This is what we want. This is the product we need. We own the thing the whole way through, so we're not trying to sell the product that we bought from somebody else, trying to sell that to the next user and justify what we did. So my question, I guess, is how important do you think systems will be in helping to make those decisions about carcass weights, about cuttability, about marbling levels, up, down, whatever? We're going to continue to select for marbling as hard as we can go because we know that's crucial. But how do you see the systems fitting into that? Because we visited with 5 systems this year, and new packing plants have new opportunities to add new technology, do new things for yield. New systems have the ability to benefit at all levels, all the way to retail, and change kind of our common concepts of we need more of this or we need more of that, because we all decided that when we went to Fall Folks. I guess I want this question about systems and their influence on what's going to happen. The simplest one to bring up, because they're affecting change all over, is the prime pursuits system with Walmart.
Yeah.
They've already come out and fired a shot and said we are going to reduce the carcass weights of the cattle that we own and we feed and we pay to harvest and we put in a box and we benefit from at a retail standpoint.
So the math doesn't work. Like as you just indicated, to say we're going to make that smaller animal, smaller ribeye, that the math doesn't work out. And it won't work out long term. You can't do more with less financially. You can't there's just not enough margin there. We're talking about selling this at Walmart. That is not a high margin opportunity. Those are already razor thin as it is. So don't chase something that looks flashy that might be or hollow than you think it is. Be careful.
Now, the systems are important. As you define system, using the world's largest retailer as the example, I think the biggest danger in that is commoditizing what beef is unique in, and that's flavor and marbling and all of those things. If that becomes commodity, an expectation universally across the board, then it subtracts value. It really comes down to supply and demand. If we make a whole lot more prime, it's going to become less valuable, believe it or not. If we make a whole lot more choice, which we have done, it will become less valuable, believe it or not. It has. So it's no longer low choice, now it's a premium choice. And before long, perhaps it'll be premium choice and then prime. The only thing really driving, that added value. So we work ourselves into a premium product all the way across the board, but by doing that in volume, we somewhat commoditize it. And I think that's kind of the danger of these retailers owning 20% or more of new packing plants, coming into play. They will drive the demand. They will get the product they want. And if that is a black-hided prime steer, then more of those will come. And that's a good thing in one hand and maybe a doomsday bad thing in the other hand. But you mentioned BIF, focusing on downsizing the cow. That's a good argument. Efficiency does come with that in many ways, and I would just argue that will remain the limitation of cattle size over time. That's why we're not going from 900 plus pound average carcass weight to a 1,200 pound carcass weight average overnight. But I agree with Ty, it's increasing incrementally year over year. It will continue to do that so long as pastures can support it. And I think you talked about urban sprawl and limitations of tillable acres consuming pasture acres. Those things are real. So it's a balance, and I think supply and demand will drive the definition of what we produce. But the systems, as you call them, will strong arm that as much as they possibly can.
Well, let me add to that.
Yeah.
So realize that the value is not necessarily in anything other than sheer weight. If we take all the cattle in this country and sell them on a grid, 96% of the value is in the weight. There's a subtle change for quality, and there's a less subtle change for yield. We're selling pounds. And so don't lose sight of, we're always selling pounds, and they've got to weigh more next year to offset all of the costs that keep coming in. And I agree with the small cow size comment. I grew up on a cow-calf operation. We're not going to have giant cows. That's not going to work in most scenarios in this country, and that's okay. The cattle feeder is going to take care of the bigger carcass. The average of days on feed increases 4 years annually. We're at approximately 212 days this year. Next year will be 216. The following year will be 220, so on and so forth. The cattle feeder is where the giant change in carcass weight is coming from. And the math in their economics says make them bigger year over year over year. And there's no stopping that in the near future.
I had Kurt first, and I got Mr. Butcher, okay? So, Mr. Russell, I got you earlier. Do you have a mic?
Guess what, Chip? I have a mic.
Say that. Okay, I'm sorry I missed you. My apologies.
Well, I can't see you. But
Yeah, it's mine, yeah.
First of all, to you three gentlemen, this is outstanding discussion. With yesterday and today, so impressive. I do have, Wade kind of stole my thunder on this question. I've been on the Board of Trustees for, I think this is my 4th year now, and sometimes discouraged about how slow we are as a breed association, getting things implemented and things done, and I think we're just a touch better than maybe the academic world, which you guys are in, and maybe you're just a touch better and quicker than our government. So I'm thinking USDA. And Dr. Lawrence, I'm ecstatic to think that you can possibly get this done in 3 to 5 years.
I need his help. He needs my help.
I understand.
Both of us. Yeah.
What is the cost going to be to packers? And we all know that the big four kind of drive pretty much everything when it comes to the beef industry and packing world. Are they going to be in on this? I mean, or is USDA can they force them to do this, I suppose? How are we going to change this yield grade system from the packers aspect to make this happen in 3 or 5 years? And my second part of the question would be, we're all big boys and big girls in this room. And Dr. Lipsy back in the 90s told us our cattle were too big, and we changed as a breed. Some people didn't like to hear that at that time, but we changed and we adapted, and I think this breed personally is in the best position to meet this marbling issue or non-issue as the number one thing, but also the red meat yield. Please be candid, be honest to us as Simmental, Sim-Angus breeders in this room. Where does this breed set? Are we going down the right path, in your opinion, to the other breeds, continental and English, in this industry?
Can I split those in half real quick to the two questions? And so Dale kind of alluded to the first one real quick, maybe the Packers driving of this. So Dale, I'm going to let you quickly knock out that first one.
Yeah, cost of instrument development is expensive. I mean, we're talking about the development of $1 million pieces of equipment that will be, developed by a technology company somewhere outside of academia for the purpose of time. Who will buy those instruments? Just like today, the packers will buy those instruments. They buy the grading cameras. By the way, grading is not mandatory, it's voluntary. So USDA can't force anything on the packer. The packer is on board 100%. I would dare to say the packer is driving this more than anybody. So there is because there is money to be made by the packer in more accurately paying for red meat yield. So that is, again, why I'm confident, I think Ty's confident that this 3 to 5 year, although we don't know if it's 3 or 5 or 6, but that's why we're confident this will move in the near future, because the packers are behind it. There's an economic incentive for them to do it, and the technology providers will be there to develop it.
So now, in interest of time and orderliness, because I know the room's excited here, and so I got to be sensitive of time. So I'm just going to run through this way. You each get a brief answer to a remarkably important question. The second one, Ty, I'll just start with you. Where do you think this population of cattle is situated for the next 20 years?
The Sim Angus is probably better situated than the Simmental, solely because of the larger focus on quality. But what I want to say is, moving forward, there should be more focus on quality and cutability simultaneously. Don't be solely focused in one direction. Maybe one of our breeds has gone too much quality. Maybe some other breeds went too much cutability. So I like where you're sitting, and focus on the entirety of the animal. And obviously, fertility, calving ease, birth weights, growth rates, the system of producing that animal from birth to conception. Conception to consumption.
Dale?
Yeah, I think the willingness to hybridize, breeds and use breed complementarity and heterosis is a terrific thing, but ultimately to develop those as a breed within a breed, so that we do get some more potential for heterosis in those cattle. But ultimately, genomics, your breed association represented by IGS, using genomics to make advancements, that's where it's at. We're going to use genomic tools.
Dr. Wiegand?
I'm incredibly biased in this conversation, but
That's why I let you go last, because I already kind of tainted the pool a moment ago.
But when I stand in front of 525 undergraduates in animal science, I don't talk about breeds. I talk about biological types of cattle. And I think that is the mindset that whether you intended to or not intended to, Simmental has found their way into that space. And whether that's linking up and you look at the IGS situation, whatever it is, because we could argue that we can go out and cherry pick cattle of different colors and sizes and shapes and whatever. Yesterday I took a picture of a yellow steer that I am certain has some Brahman influence. Took a picture of that steer and sent it to my brother, and I said, "Here's a West Texas special," and he replied with, "That's a moneymaker." But it was because of a biological type. It was a little bit phenotype. Do I think about the genotype? No. But at the end of the day, if we think about biological types of cattle, we settle in on that as a collection of traits, I think you're in a really good spot, which is why I gravitated to the commercial side of this breed, biological types of cattle.
Great question, and thank you. Again, I'm going to do my best. We have one more short session before lunch, and Callie's looking at me like, Chip, shut. I know. Somebody's got to keep me on task. I still owe 2 men the microphone. Mr. Russell.
So, related to your 1,500-pound carcasses at some point down the future, most of us in the southwestern third of the country cannot make a cow pregnant in today's situation that will produce a steer with a 1,500-pound carcass. So are we looking at, I guess I'm asking, are we looking at the beef industry going somewhat the way of the pork industry, where we have terminal lines and maternal lines? Or is all that weight going to come through technology at the feedlot?
I'm going to ask one of you to tackle this just in the interest of time. Fair enough? So,
Most of the weight change will come at the feedlot with time and technology. We know with growth technology, implants, beta agonists, and sheer days on feed how to grow a bigger animal, and we can do it quite well. So if you can produce a 600-700 pound weaned calf, get it to a feedlot, we can take care of the rest. We will make it bigger every year.
I like the conciseness of that answer, and I'll actually tag on to something. I had a colleague pull some data for me a few weeks ago, and I've mentioned it to a few folks in the room, just to know, kind of to your point. And so I went to those folks who have participated in our CHR program, so we have mature cow weights, and those same folks who were harvesting a large number of cattle. So the same operation, that is, I have cow weights, I have carcass weights. And these were, as you can imagine, it's our population, predominantly Sim-Angus type cattle. Consistently, on average, there was a 200 pounds advantage on the steer side, the live weight side for the steer, right? So we were proving, you're already doing this because you're hybridizing and using the right whole life cycle indexes to move forward. As a collective, you are making cows that have the potential to subdue mature size and produce calves that can get at least outbest their mothers by weight by at least a couple hundred pounds. And the old cowboy adage, at least in Missouri, is, a calf will weigh what his mature cow weighs, his mature mom does. If you do that in today's world, you're broke, right? And you all knew that a long time ago, and that's why the data already proves something that you've been working on for years. We're making our calves get heavier than their moms. So, Mr. Butcher, it seems appropriate that we would allow you to ask the last question of this session.
Okay. I've been in this a long time. How much of liver abscesses is genetic and how much of it is environmental? And of the environmental aspect, how do we, because if you got a moderate cow, and you're breeding them to even a fairly terminal bull that in Jordan, Montana comes off the cow at 7 months at 5.5, we've got to stretch these cattle out on something to get them, like say to the yearling phase. And then you got this obstruction in the way with these liver abscesses. How much is liver abscess related to genetics and how much is environment?
So I'm going to distribute the questions to make sure we get them answered. First, you should know, we're awful curious about these things too, right? So your team has evolved to include a major player in the business by the name of Simplot. And one of the beauties of working with Simplot for our young sire proving grounds is going forward, it's not going to happen tomorrow, but down the road when these next meetings get made, every calf that comes out of that, on top of the typical stuff that we would get, is going to have a heart score, a lung score, and a liver score. And so we're trying to capture those phenotypes. They are hard to get. Dale, it seems logical this would be a question for you. Talk about the liver concern.
Yeah, we're working on your question. Unfortunately, we don't have a very clear answer yet, but we have one really large study that's near completion, another study starting probably with NAAB soon, working with the guys at Colorado State, looking at heritability estimates of liver abscess. Right now, there's an industry group, a competitor, I think, out there that has calculated a 7% heritability on liver abscess. We have another research trial that backs that up pretty strongly. So is it genetic at 7% heritability? Pretty small. At least currently, perhaps you could put enough selection pressure on that 7% and grow it to a higher number. But I think Ty agrees as he, shakes his head. It's hugely environmental and predominantly management driven. And so can we set cattle up for failure genetically? Perhaps, but it's hugely environmental.
And then you got the other elephant in the room, which is respiratory heart failure. And so you got liver abscess, you have respiratory heart failure, you're trying to get the cattle bigger. What do we feed these cattle to grow them to a point where we can efficiently feed them right getting to the feedlot, say as a yearling, without, and I guess in my mind, logically, you would want to cut down the days on feed on a hot ration if liver abscesses were a problem. So is there some research or something going on what feeds are negative or positive to this liver abscess, heart condition? You see, we're so antagonistic between, we want to get the cattle bigger, but we have these two roadblocks.
Can we set the stage to the response to this question? That one, I think the industry would say we know that the heart issue is much more genetic than the liver. That's why we're working pretty aggressive. I think the industry would agree with that. So I'm going to take that one off the table since everybody's nodding. But then I want to go back to, could you differentiate one thing for Mr. Butcher's final question? Liver abscess prevalence in native beef cattle versus the beef on dairy population that you spoke of. What's the difference there? Percentage-wise-ish.
I'll take that.
Good.
So beef cattle holistically on feed 200-ish days have about a 27% liver abscess rate, steers and heifers. The dairy cross or the dairy animal, much higher. The dairy cross is about 60% holistically across the country today, on feed 300, 330 days. It in part is a function of days on feed, but more important than solely days on feed is the gut health.
Is the what?
The gut health. So that those dairy-reared animals are removed from mom on day one, hour one, sometimes minute one, and placed immediately into a small confinement area and provided milk and feed. And I think everyone in this room who grew up on a cow-calf operation would say that feed is not needed for a long time. The rumen doesn't really develop for about 6 weeks. And so putting feed into an animal early is not appropriate. We're witnessing at calf ranches those calves being provided steam-flaked corn the first day of life. Their digestive system might as well be a pig for the first month of life. So that system is arguably to the detriment of gut health early on. And that manifests itself throughout their lifetime, and we see it at the end. And so that's the biggest difference is the environment, the way in which they're managed, the way in which they're raised, and then you hit the nail on the head. A really, really hot diet is detrimental or can be detrimental to gut health. Part of that's the management and the transition from a starter to an intermediate to a finisher ration. Some of it's things that are out of our control. Big weather events. Cattle back off feed for a huge storm coming in and then they gorge after that. Those aren't easy to control and they do happen. And so we're not going to get away from the issue. We do need to do a better job of managing it.
All right. With that, I have to do my job. And the thing I would take away from that, Mr. Butcher, is while we talked a lot about liver abscesses, the bigger issue is in the beef on dairy composite cattle than it is in your natives. Ladies and gentlemen, I got to get these guys off the stage, and here's why. We got one more quick thing we're going to talk about before lunch, and then we'll eat. But why'd we come to the Panhandle of Texas? To talk about weighty, serious beef industry issues. It's why we're here. I think you got a sense of that in this particular panel. Give our friends a nice hand for me, please.